Good morning. So we've got 11,000 startups every hour in the world. So, we're not hurting for new companies. And what's interesting is 76% of those companies, only the entrepreneur is the lone employee. And I would suggest many of those companies are overstaffed, if you want to kind of pick it up. And so the challenge is we got way too few scale-ups. In fact, our country, it's about 3%. The rest of the world, it's only 1%. And the reality is you're the ones that generated all the jobs since the Great Recession, 92% of them. The large companies let go of folks. The small business basically churned and burned. And so you're really the unsung heroes of the economy. And so that's what we want to talk about. Is what does it take for you if you're going to be able to go out and give and make the change you want to? How do we scale up and do that well? And I want to actually share great news with you. We've got an unbelievable economy. This year, it'll be $88 trillion. That's up from $34 trillion at the turn of the century. So we're almost 3x, averaging over $10,000 for every man, woman, and child on the planet. It's really just a distribution issue. I also want you to take a look at all of the folks in the United States. We used to be the big dog, 60% of the global economy. If you're not global, you're leaving 3/4 of the opportunity right there on the table. One of the reasons why we're operating on 6 continents. The other great news, it does not matter what industry that you're in. We really thought that the automobile was going to put the horse out of business, but last year it was a global, thriving, $300 billion global industry. And so, look, this is an economy issue. If we had a great recession next year, we would just be at an economy the size we had in 2017. And so the reality is, if you can't do $1 million or $1 billion in this, it's really our challenge. And so that's what I want to really take a look at moving forward. So what does it take if you're really going to scale a significant business? And Scott was kind enough to endorse the back of the book. You're all going to get a copy of it. And it really requires those two things, both discipline, which I think is interesting as its root from disciple, the discipline and the focus in order for you to be able to scale. What's interesting, I want to give you a story. He was sitting right where you're sitting here in 2005, 50 employees, Sydney, Australia. 3 years ago, they went public at $4.2 billion. He and Mike still own 75% of the company. And I checked last night, and they're at $30 billion in market cap as they've scaled from 50 to 3,500 employees. And what I love about the story is not only have they done well, but they've done good. They've been consistently named one of the best places to work, usually number 1 or number 2 in all of Australia. Now that they're in other different parts of the world, just named number 1 in Amsterdam. And from the very beginning, and I think it's one of the reasons why when I saw Scott a few months ago again in Las Vegas, he said right at the beginning we laid the foundation that we were going to give. And so they set this early pledge that they're going to have 1% of their product, 1% of their profit, 1% of their employee time, and 1% of their equity, which is a significant number on $30 billion in market cap. And you can see just some of the results that they've had and impact on the hundreds of thousands of children around the world. So I don't want to come here and talk about Apple. I want to come here and talk about Apple Tree. And so John's a partner of mine. I want to tell you a little bit about his journey as I bring this whole story together over the next 42 minutes that we have together. And John kind of grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Ridley, Pennsylvania. Almost everyone else of his friends either ended up dead or in jail, but he managed to escape. And he put together this company in the call center business. This, again, isn't Google or Apple or Facebook. It's answering phones. And they do this all over the world, and it's a commodity industry, and it's a really tough business. But he put in a lot of great practices that we're going to talk about. And in an industry that averages 200% turnover, and right now we got a situation where we're at full employment. I was just in Ireland earlier this week, and they are at full employment in Ireland and just looking for talent in order to fuel their growth. In that business, he was able to take that from an industry average 200% to a record-setting 18%. Now, I want to pause just for a second. One of the things that we really want you to look for is where is that internal 10x that you've got? We call it the X factor in the book. This 10x you've got over the competition in your particular marketplace. And I'm going to come back to how John was able to do this. And in an industry that averaged 4% profitability, he was able to take that to a record 21.8%. And I want to put that in perspective. That was better than Apple's profitability last year. And in an industry where he was able to roll these companies up buy them for 3 times earnings, which is the typical valuation that most of us would get in this room, this $2 billion company came along and said, John, you run call centers better than anybody else. And so they paid him a company public multiple for the result. And so what did he do? And what has he done since? So I want to come back to Scott's notion about this idea of discipline and focus. And so we've always built our stuff around these 3 fundamental disciplines. First, that we really understand what our priority is. In this executive program I founded years ago, and I still get to teach in it at MIT, I used to host Jim McCann. And Jim founded a little company that we know today as 1-800-Flowers. And Jim, I loved, had all over his building these posters that said, but will it sell more flowers? And he'd walk around and say, so what are you working on? But is that going to sell more flowers? And what are you working on? But is that going to sell more flowers? And his team was free to ask him, but Jim, what are you working on? And is that going to sell more flowers? And look, October 1st, we've got the beginning of kind of, for many of us, the last quarter of the year. Is it absolute clear in your mind, as well as everyone else in the organization, what is that small dream that Liz talked about? It's the thing we call a quarterly theme. What is the one thing that if we could just as a team collectively get that accomplished in the next 90 days will make all the difference in the world? For me, I had to get my gross margin fixed back when my company got in trouble. So we're going to come back to that. Number 2, though, the only way for me to have an insight into that is to have real data. And what struck me was the importance of us being with our community, with our customers. When Liz decided to actually take the leap and go to Uganda, that's when it made all the difference in the world. And so Sanjeev Mahanti, who endorsed the back of the book, he was stuck with this brand called Benetton in India. And not only it's a global losing brand, but it wasn't doing well in his country up against Levi Strauss. And so we just did one thing. We said, look, Sanjeev, you need to get back with your community. You need to get back with the customers. You need to get back with the employees. And he put this card up at every one of his stores and he said, hey, you got any ideas, complaints, concerns, issues? Please email me. And he began, couple hundred began flowing in every day. And like Warren Buffett reading the headlines as he does every morning to make his investment decisions, Sanjeev got back in touch, a good gut feel for what was happening in his marketplace. And then he would pick one of those customers and he'd call one every single day. And in 24 months, he made it the #1 fashion brand in India, displacing Levi Strauss. And I could tell the rest of the story, but do you have the kind of insight, both quantitative and qualitative feel for what's going on so you know what we need to focus on? And then look, it does us no good to have this information if we don't get in small group and we begin to discuss it and talk about it. We're a being that needs to talk in order to kind of get things sorted out. And so it's really these things that we became well known for, simple in their explanation, but if you put them in practice, can make a huge difference. And John wouldn't have thought to run his call center business without every employee being in some kind of a daily huddle together. I was struck by Rick Warren's description last night of what you've got to do every day and once a week and once a year, and that same kind of routine with ourselves personally is absolutely what we've got to have with our companies. And it's these routines that do set us free. So we lost a great entrepreneur a week and a half ago, T. Boone Pickens. Many of you might read about it, 91 years young, had an unbelievable run up until the year 2000, and then he lost it all. And what I love about his story is he was in his 70s, and we heard Greg talk about it last night, that of GROW, the W, this commitment to ongoing learning. And what was wonderful is T. Boone dared to ask the question in his 70s, wait a second, what maybe haven't I learned yet? And he went out and continued to search for the answer. And he found it. He changed one daily routine. Remember, our success is just the sum total of things that we do more of or less of every day. Do we pray? Do we meditate? How we eat? Do we exercise? And the kind of routines that we put in place in our own organizations. And so he found it, and I'm going to give you the end of the story. He was able to take what little he had left at the turn of the century, and not that the number matters, but he turned that into $4 billion, which he ultimately then gave away. And what I find fascinating is, first, he didn't actually make his first billion till he was in his 70s. So guess what? Looking around this room, some of us still have time, right? And then he wrote a book about it, and I love the title of the book, The First Billion is the Hardest. So trust me, once you make the first, the second, third, and fourth comes so much easier out there. And what did he discover? Well, he went out and they looked at this fascinating tool that we've got. And he found out that there is this capability that really is tied to success in almost every field, and it's our ability to recognize patterns. And then he looked at our brain and said, you know, we can sit around and think about it, but at that point our amygdala lights up, and men, we just want to fight or flight. Women who weren't involved in those initial studies, now that we've looked, you have a much healthier. You want to flock together. And he found, you know what? If we can just get together and talk. And so what did he do to make this transformation? And it started at 5:45 a.m. every morning. His analysts would come in and scour the internet and their network for what happened in our industry the last 24 hours. And if you don't think things are changing in your world with your markets and your employees and customers, your head is in the sand. And so he immersed himself in that community. And once they gathered that information, then at 6:15 he would call in. And he would have a conversation with the two of them. And he would ask questions. He'd go ask him to get more information. And then 6:30 to 7:30, as he worked out, he actually challenged President Obama, 30 years his junior, to a fitness challenge. This is a guy that knew how to carry his brain around up until the very end. And while he's working his muscles out, his mind was looking for what? The patterns to what he had just heard versus yesterday, last week, and the last 60 years he'd been in the industry. And then 7:30, he would break bread with his senior team. And they would talk about what needed to get done. Now, I don't think it's by accident that John D. Rockefeller, the namesake of my first book, he had lunch every day with his 9 directors. He would walk to work and walk home every morning and night with his founders and his brother. And he made sure that even when they moved from Cleveland to New York City, that they lived near enough each other, close enough to Standard Oil headquarters, they could continue to do those walks and talks in small group community. Steve Jobs, every day when he returned to Apple, had lunch with Jonathan Ive and the design team. And it was that simple routine of information and communication and breaking bread together that allowed him to accomplish what he did. And so we know as you go from this kind of startup phase to really begin to scale, there is this gap. And you know, what got you here won't get you there. Look, you had to have absolute ego in the beginning, but that's what will crush you. In the beginning, you absolutely had to have answers. But let me trust me, if you think you have answers today, that's your fatal mistake. In fact, it became one of my favorite quotes of all time. We have the answer. It's the question we do not know. And I don't know if you're going to get answers at any event like this. But what I hope you search for is a better question. And so I want to go there. And so I want to look at what I consider, and it was an interesting thing that happened to me. So I'm going to take you back 10 years ago. It was 2009. I had just turned 50, and I was in the middle of my kind of midlife crisis. And my pastor calls me, and I had just moved to Barcelona, Spain, the family. And we were going to kind of spend an adventure there for a few years. And he said, hey, we've got this initiative down in, it just happened, Uganda, that I've been involved with. And he's been my pastor for 22 years. And he said, Verne, I'd really like you to come on down this time and join us on mission. And he gave us a book. And I hope you guys have had a chance to read. How many of you have read this book? I think it's an absolute must for all of us Christians in this room when helping hurts. And I'm reading through the book, and it describes how just giving $1 to a woman in a slum in India could absolutely do absolutely more dangerous harm than good, how our great intentions can be disruptive. And I don't think it was the intention Dave wanted, my pastor, but after reading the book, I'm like, I'm not going. I was doing it for my glory. I wanted to do it, maybe, I don't know, say that I did it, and we're supporting this school and all that, and I love that. But the book was clear that I should really stick to my knitting, and if rather than spend all that money on the flight and all those things, just give it to the folks who are in the field, the Liz's who choose to actually go there and live there and set up the factories. And so it really changed the way. By the way, that was the version of 2009. This is the newer one I showed you. That's the one I read that came out that year. And so I made a decision. And that is, I love entrepreneurs, and I believe they solve most of the problems on the planet. And so I invested in my dear Spanish brother from another mother, Cesar Martinel, and we're fixing the whole low-cost housing problem on the planet. And my buddy Barrett Ursick, a student of mine from the MIT program, is getting rid of all the fertilizers on the planet as we're bringing yogurt to the soil. And it's amazing the difference we're making. And Cynthia Kay, who scaled one of the early ed tech companies, was helping schools at 98 million now, has built a 2D technology that helps children all over the world learn to read and write through a 3D fun experience. And this initiative right now, this nonprofit, I'm supporting Julia and helping 1 million women get over that $1 million mark. We're going to add $1 trillion to our economy through this effort. And because we're here talking about leadership health, this clinic, founded by one of the Forbes 400 families 42 years ago, saved my life back in the 20s. And so today I'm chairman of this, was vice chairman, just made chairman. And I want to share this message I've got about 30 minutes of what nature, what Mother Nature, what God has actually put before us that we seem not to be able to recognize. And so let me tell you some of the work that we're doing there. We recognize there's 7.6 billion of us on the planet, and we each have different fingerprints. So why do we think anyone has the same disease? I was really struck by Rick's note last night. I want to go see him because he's got this, quote, rare disease. And our view is there are no diseases. This was something that Big Pharma created in conjunction with the FDA so they could have a monopoly on this thing, and they could create these artificial things that we pump into our bodies, and they don't want to cure us. They just want a recurring revenue stream. And so for 42 years, we've been dealing with that mess out there, but healing amazing numbers of people. A buddy of mine, Steve Sergi, runs one of the top staffing companies in the United States, and he calls me. He was a big soccer player at Penn State, and he says, Verne, can't believe it, but Sammy, my son, is at Xavier, one of the top 10 soccer teams, and he's been setting every kind of record as a freshman, and then he came down extremely ill. Like, he can't get out of bed to go play soccer, let alone go to class. And the doctors say he's got Lyme disease and he's got black mold syndrome. We got syndromes for everything. And he must have psychological issues because he did have a dear friend commit suicide. And so that meant he was going to take this bag of pills. And that just made him worse. So we basically medevaced him to our clinic. And we ran this battery of tests. We've been considered the Mayo of alternative health. We actually had the president of Mayo Clinic's labs for 15 years, Keith Laufman, on our board to make sure that what we're doing is absolutely world class. And these are my results I get every year. This is not Sammy's, not allowed to share those. But in these 400 data points, we don't find the 2 or 20, but there's always 5 to 10 underlying issues that are unique to every one of us as a unique human being, like our fingerprint. And we found him, and we wheeled Sammy in, and 5 days later, after the doc said there was nothing to be done, he walked out, and he's been setting records ever since at Xavier. In fact, they wrote up this miracle. We also picked up Linus Pauling's torch. Linus is one of only 2 human beings on the planet that won 2 Nobel Prizes. What a gift. And one of the things he discovered is that nature gave us this natural chemo, this natural antibiotic. And these antibiotics have just been crushing us around the planet. It's called C. It's not a vitamin. And the great news is that this thing called sepsis that killed Nelson Mandela. Oh, that's really great. I got it. Whoa! Thank you for magnifying the message. But what's interesting is this disease kills half the folks that go into the hospital. It's the number one cause of death. 15 to 19 million people got Nelson Mandela. And so one of our brave docs, Dr. Merrick in Virginia, had a woman coming in, 43. All her organs are shutting down from sepsis. This is a death sentence. He knows it, and he says, all right, hey, I've got the Hippocratic Oath to save this woman's life. I'm going to give her an IVC. And not only is she alive the next morning, but all her underlying issues were gone. And so he said, all right, I'm going to try it for the next 46 patients. And in their previous 47, you would normally have a death rate of 30 to 50%, depending on the quality. And they have one of the top hospitals in Virginia, so they only had 19. The next 46, they only had 4 and none from sepsis. Now, FDA says you're supposed to do this kind of blind study, but his nurses wouldn't allow this death sentence to the patients in terms of the placebo. So they did for the next 150 patients, and there's only been one fatality since. And so it finally became mainstream. About a year ago, it got published in Physicians Weekly. And if anyone in your family is coming close to having some infection or whatever that they can't deal with, because I got to tell you, we're kind of only as energetic as the least healthy member we've got in our family. And so it's given me great pleasure to say that, hey, we've been able to go out there and save lives. Now, I'm going to tie this story back to where we're going with John's company. The other thing that's been fun, this another nonprofit, the Reardon Clinic's a nonprofit. This is the other nonprofit I co-founded down in Panama. This is our famous kind of facility that we've got down there. You recognize a Frank Gehry facility where we've really been turning to nature for answers, Mother Nature, if you would. And so, let's go talk strategy for a moment. I consider the best question ever asked by this Harvard professor, Clayton Christensen, who said, if you really want to understand your business, understand what is the job that your product or service really does for your customer. And if you want a great video, go to YouTube, and you're going to see Clayton Christensen's video about what is the job of a milkshake. And only till this company, you can guess the name, really understood why morning commuters were buying a milkshake. Could they understand both how to improve it and how to pivot around it? And so I want to put a question out to you. In a word, what is the number one job of all of our products, of all of our services? In a word, what's the number one job of all of our companies and organizations to do? In a word. So if you would, just shout it out. What's that? Meet the needs? Maybe. Glorify God? Yes. Keep going, keep going. To serve? I love that word, but I'm going to give it a maybe. By the way, maybe means no. I'm just trying to be nice to the audience. Now, here has been my challenge. I get serve, I get glorify God, I get love, but I haven't known how to implement it. And part of our revelation came again from nature. I think it's amazing when we look around what God has put before us. It's that kind of notion that pray, but roll away from the rocks. We've been given things along the way that we should embrace, to take advantage of, to make change. And what I find interesting is there are no straight lines in nature. That's a human creation I see on hockey stick projections of startups. You know, this is the reality. And as I fly over this beautiful planet of ours and I see rivers, what's nature's rule for that river as it moves from Everest to the ocean? What's its rule? What path does it follow? The path of least resistance. Now, look, I don't know if I'm right, but I know it's practical. What does it mean to serve? That's what we wrestled with. What does it mean to provide value? What is it that God would like us to do with our businesses this time on planet? And this is what I find useful. I don't know if it's the right word, but it's if our product and service can ultimately help make someone else's life easy, not hard. And if you think about it, there's this new Convene app. And it can have all the benefits and features on it, but if it's not what? Easy to use. It's dead on arrival. Are you easy to do business with? Are you easy to be found? And I want to keep going here, but he just retired a week and a half ago, Jack Ma, and I thought Alibaba had a very, very simple mission to make it just, easy to do business. It's one of the reasons why IKEA bought TaskRabbit, because the aging population wants to get their stuff, but it's not easy. Because who wants to spend money on a Rolex when I can get something like Rick Warren said, a watch for 15? Why don't I just get it there at IKEA? But it's not easy to put together. I've got a dear friend, Hank, in Barcelona, who runs a company here in San Diego, 6,300 miles away, and he can do it. By the way, simple value proposition, you're going to drive south. We have the easiest way for you to get Mexican insurance, and he does extremely well with 7 employees and a dog. And so, look, from a business perspective, I want you to go back, and I want you to really ask this question to your team, and it's super practical. What do we have to do this week to make it even easier, and ultimately, for our product or service to make someone else's business or life easy? Now, where am I going with this? Because let me tell you what's not easy. Scaling with people. I loved Rick's comment last night. It's true about entrepreneurs. I often kid entrepreneurs, we actually would love our business if we just didn't have employees or customers interrupting our grand visions, that we have out there in the marketplace. It was going, in fact, and most employees think the job of their boss is to make their life what? Miserable, right? We call this company, and management's here at the top, and the employees are at the bottom, and we know which way that stuff rolls. And so I want to come back to John. Look, there's 6,000 leadership books written every single year, yet our engagement stats haven't moved 0.1% in 4 decades. We got about 19% engaged employees. So I got to tell you, I think most of these leaders missed it. I hate to be so simplistic, but if the job of our product or service is to ultimately ease the pain, to make someone else's life easier, not harder, then our job of a leader is very simple. You can throw all of this out. Our job then is to make the lives of our employees what? Easy, not hard. That I can act on. I have a hard time, and by the way, I suggest a better 4-letter word is the word care or love. I don't think there's any way that our employees can love our business, love on our customers, care for our customers, care for us, if they don't feel loved and cared by us. But what does that mean? And I find if I could just take the easy path. So let me tell you what John did. So John would buy these companies. They'd have 5 to 15, maybe 25 employees. He'd buy it from one of the aging baby boomers who, honestly, the 19th century practices were just really kind of, they're the employees and we're the boss. And because it's got low margins, let's shove them in C-class space, some strip mall that had been converted into windowless space, and we're going to stick our employees in there. And, maybe the keyboard, the letter C doesn't work so well, and the headsets aren't that great, but gosh, we don't have much margin here anyway. And John would buy the companies, and he would love on the employees. He would take care of them. He would focus on, all right, my job's to make their life easy, not hard. And so on day 2, they would ceremoniously walk in and they would grab these really bad chairs that they're sitting in, and they would ceremoniously either throw them off a roof if they could, or at one location they put them in a pile and burnt them in the parking lot. That didn't turn out so well as it kind of melted the asphalt. But who cared? And then he would ceremoniously wheel in the Herman Miller Aeron chair. I mean, this is the best chair that you can buy for any human being on the planet. And we're talking about folks that answer phones. And he would show a movie, how it's been featured in 20 different movies, and it's in the Museum of Modern Art and all of that. And he would then move them over the next year into Class A or A- space. And even though no customers ever visited, he made sure that the atriums were beautiful so that as the employees came in, they felt pride. And John gave. He understood that charity started at home. Now, what's interesting is as we scale, this is what gets us. Complexity. As we add people, locations, product lines, services. And one of the things that's interesting is that research is clear that the average size team that's effective is somewhere between 4 and 5. It's not 8 or 9 even. And it's one of the reasons why our special op teams are 4 or 5. It's something even nature's understood. And so what I find interesting is we ended up with these org charts. And you don't see this in beehives or ant colonies, this hierarchy where there's this boss and all this leadership. And I think I know why, because form and function needs to match. We, for the last 50 years, have really been working on organizing muscle, our might to go to war or whatever the case. And I think nature showed us a very interesting thing. God gave us this amazing body that organizes muscle in a way that allows us to do fine motor skills but build massive things. And so if you see it, there's the head, the shoulders, the arms, feet, toes, and fingers. If you've ever seen it that way. But it's a really great way to organize muscle. By the way, that's the real org chart. We recognize that kind of stuff. We'll move on. This is a big company one, chief idea killer, VP stay the course, manager new ideas. They had this one in Silicon Valley where the org chart mirrored the personality of the particular entrepreneur. But here's the reality. We have moved from our muscle to our mind, from our back to our brain, and our org charts didn't change. And so we've created a new idea. You remember the startup team, and then accounting wanted their own office, and sales wanted theirs, and then we opened up some other offices to get close to customers, and then we opened up like product groups, and we opened up service groups. The problem is we put in like area managers and district managers and regional managers, and we piled all of this, what costs us about 30%, onto our people. And what's interesting is that does not make their life easy. It makes it hard. And so we've got it. Here's what I find interesting. That saddle back right there. Rick said it last night, that it's the small group. That's the church. That's what my pastor, Dave Norman, has done with us. We are all in small groups in our congregation. And that's church. And that's how church works best, without a whole bunch of management. Never was meant to be that way. There's the guy who's pioneering this thinking, reinventing organizations, and in there's a nursing organization that's now moving across the planet. Started with 4 nurses and a special ops team, because nurses can do a lot more than docs. And today, there are 14,000 nurses across Germany, through China, into the United States. And there's only 50 people you'd call specialists or VPs of this, that, or the other thing, and maybe 18 coaches. And they look like this. And this big white goods manufacturer in China, led by this amazing Chinese entrepreneur with 74,000 employees. I can always tell you how much management you have. I just divide by 7 to 10. There was that always magical rule within the Bible. And so they got rid of that middle management. This isn't theoretical. And they put those into small groups, small enterprises. And they structured like this. And they're crushing it out there. We had to do the same, because we ended up with an enemy that was organized into cells, communicating through social media. They wouldn't line up like we used to in the world wars. And so General McChrystal, who had life and death decisions to make, restructured into a team of teams. And us mere mortals, my buddy Ron Lovett now on our team scaled across Canada, 1,500 private security guards with no management, maybe 8 people at headquarters. And what we call the agile scale-up. What's interesting is this idea of the small group meeting and supporting each other has implications not just within our church, not within our other life, but within our business. Now, what makes that all work is Atlassian, this technology, which is why Scott's company is at 30 billion. And when Google studied what makes for effective teams, because Google really is just organized into 3-person teams and like an ant colony or a beehive, swarm all over the technology. And by the way, I think it's interesting that it's a queen, not a king, that's at the top of what nature put in place. And I'm going to come to that. And what Google found when they studied what makes for an effective team, they only found 2 things. And I guarantee you we've found it in our forums in EO and YPO and the convene groups. That first, and I really want you to pay attention to this when you go back. I want you to think about your last weekly meeting. I want you to think about your last monthly gathering. Did everybody talk equally? Or did 2 or 3 people always dominate? And by the way, guess whose voices are not heard? The introverts, which got mentioned this morning, and women. Number 2, that it's our ability to connect at a human level, to know more about us than at the business level, that actually makes for effective teams. It's why we opened up this morning. My Monday call started at 6 a.m. because I'm on the West Coast, and we open with a round of good news, personally and professionally, so that we connect. And when Yahoo brought me into their team, when they're having their big mess, and we're going around for the first time, and Libby, their new head of HR, shared for the first time some stuff about her son, the rest of the team said, "Libby, we not even know you had a son." And so this book has really impacted me over the last year. Why greatness cannot be planned. First, having led the strategy sessions for my church, I've really come to appreciate the discernment process versus the traditional planning process. And what's interesting, if there's a revolution going on, God made man and woman, made masculine and feminine. And masculine was always to be purpose-driven. It's clear in Genesis what the masculine role. They're to take the hill, to be mission-driven, to set priorities. Yet the feminine was to bring the love, was to bring the art. I find it's fascinating. 1 out of 30 men are colorblind, but only 1 out of 200 women are because of what they bring. And so if there is a crisis within our companies and our organizations and our churches, is that we've been too masculine driven. And that it's time for us, it's not about a men-woman thing. I hope we don't pit each other against each other, because us men can have as much feminine energy brought to the table, and women are often been forced to be masculine in order to survive. And what's interesting is that it's serendipity that actually drives. I have a question for you. Is anyone in this room, what you're doing right now, and you've heard the speakers talk about it, what you're doing right now, was this ever your plan? No, it was a series of serendipitous, God-driven, crazy moves. And so there's the book. I hope you have a chance to take a look at it. We absolutely need priorities this week and this month, but in some sense, it's what gets in the way of what's one of the hottest trends, and we have a tool called the Sweat where we have you look at these trends, and that is, first, we know the aging population is driving it, but one of the things we were talking about last night at my table was the power of AI. And if your business isn't figuring out AI plus your industry, you're going to get replaced by some 22-year-old who does. And what's fascinating is for AI to really work, it's a cultural issue. And it must allow for love and serendipity to flow. We were talking about last night at my table where they couldn't figure out how to predict when a premature baby would get a raging infection, because once they do, it's over, game over. And so they finally, using big data, discovered that what was really at the heart of it was the fact that 2 hours prior to a raging infection, the premature baby's vital signs actually stabilize. It was the opposite of what the whole medical community could see, and it was this serendipitous discovery that has now allowed us to really have a huge impact. And so I created this plan, this one-page personal plan. We really understood that we should have kind of focus and discipline in our personal lives as well as our professional life. And I've always loved how Mark has had some kind of a priority every year, 2017, 2018. And the guy who really influenced me when I built this was Chuck Feeney. I hope you've read this book. Chuck and his partners founded the duty-free shops. They scaled it to where he amassed about $8 billion in personal net worth. Not that that mattered. And the first half of the book is about how he did it. But the second half of the book is about how he then, in a more difficult way, gave it away. And he gave it away anonymously. Not until I read the book did I realize that he single-handedly funded the end of the IRA war. He funded almost all the research institutions in Australia. He is one who really brought Ireland on being. And I was on this nonprofit, Nifty, where we were teaching inner city youth how to start companies. And, because there is this kind of fine line between the criminal mind and the entrepreneurial mind, and some of you've walked that very carefully. And we got in trouble in the Great Recession, and Goldman Sachs and Microsoft and McKinsey and all of our funders had to pull back, and we got this anonymous gift, and no one on the board was allowed to know who it was except our founder, Steve Mariotti. And when the book came out, I called Steve. I said, "Steve, was that Chuck who saved us?" And he goes, "Yes." And I realized at that point the Uber KPI that matters. And you heard Rick, and you've heard everybody talk about it. It's a very simple measure. How many people have we helped along the way? That's the number, not what we've got. And so when we put this plan together and we first of all put it around the 5 F's. By the way, we start with faith, and just when I turned it sideways, but these 5 F's were the ones that we built the plan around, because at the end of your life, some of the top wealth managers, including Jim Harnsberger out of Atlanta, said, "Verne, almost everyone I've dealt with at the end has the exact same 5 priorities in that order. If they didn't have a faith, they have a tendency to get it at the end. And am I right with my family and my friends and my fitness and my finance?" And so we began to look at this, and here's where I want to end and bring it back all full circle. Clearly in the relationship category, we would have our friends, our family. By the way, men, it's very clear in the United States that we report that our closest friend is our spouse, and that doesn't match with what our spouse tends to report back. And in fact, we're very lonely. I would suggest writing down a list of who would be your pallbearers. And it's difficult for men. Well, I think he might be busy, and he'd be out golfing, and I don't know. And that's why Convene has been so beautiful, and our forums and stuff, because we know we have that closeness. But I want to end by suggesting we put something on our list in addition. I want to come back full circle, and I think we as leaders, business leaders, have a fiduciary responsibility around our employees. And so I want to come back to John. I think charity starts at home. As I found, not wanting to go to Uganda, but instead investing in my own students who were making a difference. And I know about entrepreneurship, so those are the boards I'm on. And so John was struggling with this 200% turnover when he had only 4% of his salaried staff. And there clearly was this disconnect. And if his CFO would have a flat tire and could call AAA and all that, could still come in late. But if an frontline employee had a flat tire, and we're talking about this would be an economic real just disaster for this person, and they still came in late, they would get docked points. And John realized, wow, how I treat my leadership team versus my employees. And so he launched an initiative called Dream On. And he said, look, they're helping me make, without a dream, without a vision or dream, the people will perish. He said, they're helping me make my dreams come true, so why don't I theirs? And so he went out to all of his employees. He said, no limit. I want you to tell me your dream, and we as a company are going to do what we can to make them come true. And amazing stories. One employee wanted this book of poetry done in Spanish in his Puerto Rico office, and they published it. And several weren't able to go on honeymoons that they'd always wanted to. And he found, very humbly, 3 employees who were homeless, a woman working for him who got beat up by her husband, and to escape out of that abuse had grabbed her child, and they'd been in their car the last 2 weeks. And look, one thing we've got is a lot of Amex points, and we just have a lot of connections but the story I want to end on is this one. So had an employee, his first one of his 10 employees, husband is dying of this type of leukemia. And all he wanted was just this last time to go to the Philadelphia Eagles game. John's up in Pennsylvania. And so John kicks in. We have the connections. He gets the medical limo to get him there, and they get him out on the field, and he gets to sit up in the players' kind of area to watch the game. And at the end, the 53 players come out, and they've got this roped-off area, and they have a game ball, and they all sign it, and his favorite player comes out at the end, and it was an amazing day for a man who wasn't going to make it to Christmas. But it put a smile on his face. And I'm staying in touch with John on this Dream On initiative, and he tells me the story. And I said, John, what kind of leukemia has he got? We just did some work at the Reardon Clinic, and men who've got issues with their father get this. He says, you got to be careful. I said, look, John, go ask. And John never had this relationship with his employees, but he did now because of this Dream On initiative. And he goes to this employee and goes, does Dan have any, look, I know it's going to be weird for me to ask this, but does Dan have any unresolved issues with his dad? And she goes ashen white and goes, yeah, he was so close to his dad. And then they had this big fight, and before they could get it resolved, his dad one night just died. And it's weird, Dan, you're right, got sick after that. And so John said, look, I don't know. Let's just get him in counseling. We'll pay for it. And the great news is 8 years later, Dan's still here. And so, no, this is about John. So if we could, I'm almost out of time. Let's run this video.
Hi, I'm John Ratliff. I'm the CEO of Appletree Answers.
I'm Emily Ratliff, and I'm the Director of Employee Experiences at Appletree.
Essentially what we do is we have live people. We answer the phone for companies when they can't be there to answer for themselves.
Our frontline employees are the heart of our business.
We were looking for ways that we could really drive the employee experience. And somebody said, well, what if we took the Make-A-Wish charity model and we kind of provided that model for our employees?
As we narrowed down our list, that one just kept remaining at the top and turned into the concept we have now of our Dream On program.
Actually, the first time I heard about the Dream On program was when Emily, who's in charge of the program, sent an email blast out to every employee saying, another dream has been granted. And that led me to think, well, what is this Dream On program? The company will actually give back to their employees by giving them a dream, giving them their dream. I thought it was amazing. I'd never heard of something like that.
At first I thought, yeah, right. But I submitted a fairly simple dream.
I wanted my daughter to have a birthday party, an extravagant birthday party. After my wife unfortunately lost her job, we weren't able to provide that for my daughter, so I had submitted a dream.
My dream was to go on the honeymoon that I could never afford, and the honeymoon that I always dreamed of.
She was 4 at the time. I wanted to do something special for her, so I asked to take her to a boutique or a salon just down the road from where we work, and just to have her made up, feel like a princess, take some pictures.
They awarded that dream. When she called me, it was overwhelming. I didn't think it would happen.
Emily had called me and told me, she's like, we decided to grant your dream, and I was still just, for a minute, I was just in complete shock. I started crying.
Waterworks, just complete waterworks. I was overwhelmed. I didn't think it would happen. Not the dream being granted, that my daughter would be able to have this birthday party that I wanted her to have so badly.
My boss called me into the office, and they sent me and my daughter and my sister and her boy to Disney for 4 days, 3 nights. And she went to the Bippity Boppity Boutique for the makeover that I had asked for.
And then they always take it a step further, and she said, and on top of this, we would like to go ahead and give her some presents, as we know times are tough. So she got a pink bike. It was marvelous. It was wonderful.
One of my top 3 things that's ever happened to me. So besides me getting married and having my daughter, that's right up there with that.
There's unbelievable stories that have come out of the Dream On program. It's been probably the most successful initiative we've ever had as a company.
You know, when I got in trouble, and I'll go back, in 2001, I thought, like my dad, I was losing my company. We went from $500,000 to $1 million, $2 million to $4 million, $8 million, Inc. 500 company, and then boom, 9/11 hit, lost like $1 million in 10 weeks. And this guy calls me again, my pastor. I'm broke, I think we're gonna lose the house. And they decide the church's gonna have the largest kind of capital raise in the history. And I always gave a decent amount, but I'm like, and it just hosted Robert Kiyosaki. In his Rich Dad Poor Dad, he said, you know, the wealthy, if they're really serious, give when they least can afford it. And Adam Grant said that with give and take, and it was Lynne Twist who really taught me about money. That's like water. If you hold on to water, it goes stagnant and will kill you. You have to keep it flowing. And so I made this kind of crazy, Greg, I made this crazy commitment to Dave and the church. Beyond, I mean, we're not about 91%. We're talking about 12,000% of where we're at. And it was funny, it worked. I think if you want to make a ton of money, 2,000 pounds, you got to give away 200. John, when he bought those chairs, he couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
When he did the Dream On initiative, it started right in the Great Recession. His company was in trouble. I hope there's 4 practical ideas. People in small groups. Strategy, it's easy, care, love. When it comes to execution, I really think it's about granting dreams. And I think if you want cash, you got to give first. And so
Wow.
That's where I'm at, Greg.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Are you guys excited that Verne came? There's a little story we're going to let people in on that has a little bit to do with us at Convene for a minute, but it could have been anybody. We used some of your material unbeknownst to you. And I called our team together and said, well, how much of Verne's material did you use? And they said, well, it was kind of a big percent. And so I went on to social media and I said, who in heaven's name knows Verne Harnish? I need to talk to him right away. And so you called me.
Yeah.
And I was this unknown number and, hello, this is Verne Harnish. I'm like, I'm so sorry, but we use too much of your content. And you know what Verne said? This was in a learning piece. You know what Verne said? Tell me about what your mission is. So I told him what our mission was. And he said, you can use my entire book for free because I care about the kingdom of God. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And just for the record, Rick Warren's number one thing that he's thinking about right now is scaling.
Yeah.
And he wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful. What if December and Seiko Designs and all of our business would scale more just because you said you'd come to be with us today? I'm guessing from our stats and FCCI's stats that I'm pretty confident that there's probably about 50,000 employees represented in this room.
Yeah.
That means 50,000 dreams might come true if we implemented just that one idea. Yeah. But I wanted to do something that, so you've given a lot of principles, a lot of ideas, really, really, really good. You've talked to thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. What would you say people get stuck on after they've heard you? They hear the 4 things, the 6 things, they read Gazelles, they read Scaling Up, they read Rockefeller Happens, but their company is still the same size as it was before. Where do people get stuck?
Yeah, that's why I loved Liz's presentation this morning. You've got to start with a small step.
Okay.
And it's thinking you've got, it's like drinking from a fire hose. I talk fast and the like, but you start with 1 or 2 very simple things. And that's why pick one thing over the next 90 days that you think could make a difference, and just start there. But what I was hoping you were going to ask me is I've talked to a lot of folks, and what have I learned from them? And it was John Whitehead, the late John Whitehead. He and I were on the board at Nifty together, and John was co-chair of Goldman Sachs, and he went on, he was Deputy Secretary of State for Reagan. And then he went on to actually chair the redevelopment of downtown Manhattan after 9/11. And so I cornered him one day at the board, and I go, John, what have you learned? You know, he's 40 years my, senior. And he said, he thought about it for a moment, he goes, to always do a little bit of retail business every day. And I go, he says, Verne, let me explain. He goes, when I was chairman of Goldman, I had a big responsibility. I always made sure I went down to the trading floor and I'd find one trader I knew was just having a rough day. I could see it. I could feel it. And I just went over and helped. And when I was at State, even though we're doing all these big things in the Reagan administration, he said, I told my team that I want you to bring me every day one person, one family who's stuck someplace on the planet and lost their passports and needs somebody to just intervene for them for a moment. And, we get lots of calls every day. Hey, could you help me? Can you call? And it was after that I said, all right, let's just keep it simple. If you can just help one person. God is going to sit you at a table. I was at the right table last night, and I was at the right table this morning, right? Back there. Somehow or another, if you just open up, who you need to help will make themselves present. And if you do, it's what Rick said last night. That's the result.
Well, Rick was mentored by many people, as he talked about, and one of them basically said, get this simplified. And he created first base, second base, third base, fourth base. That's how you grow as a Christian, right? That's what he keeps doing. There's an interesting conversation between Dr. Bright and Rick Warren, where someone said to Dr. Bright, you're just this genius person. You created the 4 spiritual laws. You're kind of like a theological bastion of knowledge. And he said, no, I'm not that smart. I'm a tool maker that scales things, right? And that's what you're going to help all of us do today. So here's a question from the audience. When's the right time to hire your first employee? That time when you're doing it all yourself, you're staying up till midnight, and you feel like you can't afford it.
Yesterday.
Yesterday.
No, and here's the key. You guys sort of asked the question. You need to hire based on 4 criteria. First, will. Do they have the will to learn, the will to persevere, the will to serve, the will to... You can't train that. Then you've got to hire based on values. Do they fit? Then results. Skills the last. And you heard Liz somewhat talk about that up here. And you want to hire the person that complements what makes you tired. So bookkeeping. So I hired Claudia Smallwood across the street from me in Ashburn. And I knew she got me because her husband is a very successful entrepreneur, and she had done the books early for him. And she, did not need managed and would often just wow me.
Yeah.
And the sooner you can do that, then you free yourself up to do your gifts.
Okay, another question from the audience. What do we do for people with ambition when we apply the small teams concept?
Yeah, and so it was one of the things that 3M had to fix. Early on, I got to work with Art Fry, who invented the Post-it note. I'd go up to Minneapolis and lead their strategy sessions at 3M. And they were really smart, where they created 2 other parallel paths, because management was, at some level, not what they wanted. They wanted science and innovation. And so the promotion was not more people to manage. It was cooler projects and cooler initiatives and cooler things to do. To me, that's what we want to reward instead of layer in management.
Okay.
So I think that answers that.
How about we'll go where theologians fear to tread, but since neither of us are one, we could give it a shot. What about the Bible and what God did to scale his ideas? Right? I mean, he said...
Sorry, I was reading that.
You're reading the next question?
Yeah, and
Okay, well, let's do that.
It really grabbed me. I apologize. Greg, I was not paying attention.
Let's do it. What's the number one God moment that changed you to fulfill God's purpose in your life?
Yeah.
We just ask easy questions.
Yeah, I know. so I grew up around entrepreneurs. My dad had a very successful company, Higher Electronics. And then in the 73 recession, he lost it all. And back then, you don't clear bankruptcy or anything. We sold everything we had. And we became really, actually, very poor. We moved out to Kinsley. And he ultimately became an alcoholic. And there was some abuse in the family. And he ultimately became estranged from us. It was a tough moment when my sisters made a tough decision to have him put in jail because he was driving and drinking, and we didn't want this responsibility of him possibly hurting another human being. And he really kind of never forgave us for that. And it struck me, that would be that God moment where, because I was going to be a nuclear engineer. I was all set. I was going to be on Rickover's staff and help run the nuclear Navy, and it's where my plan. And I was handed this other job, which is to make sure that this never happens to another entrepreneur on the planet. And that's why, Greg, when we had our conversation, this is why I do what I do.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so.
Well, we are out of time. We're going to wrap up, but I want to just say there's the Midas Touch list at Forbes that some people know about.
Yeah.
And the Midas Touch list is who, as a private equity person, did the most that any other private equity person has done to create wealth for other people. Right? Midas Touch.
Yes.
I think what you've done today is help the people in this room create Midas Touch-like scalability. But I know that the people in this room, because of Ron Blue Trust, because of National Christian Foundation, because of the work that we all do to want to advance the kingdom, I think when we make more money, we're going to make a difference in the world, and it's because of the time you've spent with us today. So thank you.